Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. I grew up in Durango, Colorado, where most nights end with someone suggesting a drive to nowhere. Tyler and I have been those guys since high school. Two friends in an old Tacoma, a cooler in the back, and some half-formed plan to shave 15 minutes off a trip by cutting through a section of map that looks empty. We weren't reckless, just casual about risk in the way you get when nothing bad has happened yet. By last July, we'd logged thousands of miles through the Four Corners. We knew where the paved roads ended, which convenience stores stayed open late, and which county lines went quiet after sundown. We also knew the desert near Shiprock can turn from scenic to hostile the minute the sun drops. Knowing a thing and respecting it are not the same. That afternoon, we were returning from Gallup. We'd stopped to see a buddy in town and stayed longer than planned, drinking cheap beer on his porch while the afternoon stretched into early evening. The route home was straightforward. Gallup to Shiprock to Farmington to Durango, but the highways were clogged with summer traffic. Campers moved at crawling speeds, rental cars from tourists who'd never driven mountain roads, and somewhere ahead, a wreck had eastbound lanes backed up for miles. Tyler pulled up a mental map and said we could cut northwest on back roads near Shiprock, then reconnect with Highway 160 closer to the state line. He said it like we'd done it 100 times. In reality, we never had. The area was Navajo Nation land, mostly reservation roads that weren't maintained for through traffic. He swore it would save half an hour. I checked the time on my phone. It was already past 7. We'd be chasing the last of the light, and in July that meant maybe 90 minutes before full dark. I should have said no. Should have told him we'd sit in traffic like everyone else. But I didn't want to be the cautious one, didn't want to hear him joke about it for the next month. So I said sure. And just like that, we committed to a decision that would follow us home. We topped off at a gas station just south of Shiprock. The wind had died completely, leaving the air thick and still. Heat rolled off the concrete in visible waves. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sterile white glow. The cooler section hummed its constant mechanical drone. We grabbed waters and beef jerky, the kind that comes in tough plastic packages that require teeth to open. The clerk was an older woman with her hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. Her name tag was faded, unreadable. She wasn't chatty, didn't make eye contact while scanning our items. The register beeped with each pass. When Tyler asked if the dirt roads were decent north of town, she stopped moving. Her hand hovered over the scanner. She looked at our keys dangling from Tyler's hand, then at us. Really looked at us, like she was weighing whether it was worth saying anything. Finally, she spoke. "Don't go out there after dark." Not a suggestion, not advice, a statement of fact laid on the counter between us like a physical object. Tyler smiled, that easy smile he has, the one that gets him out of speeding tickets. "We'll be quick," he said. "Be faster," she replied, and something in her tone made my stomach tighten. Her eyes held ours for another second. Then she turned away, bagging our items with deliberate movements. We told ourselves she meant livestock on the road, flash flooding in the washes, drunk drivers weaving home. We told ourselves a lot of things in those next few minutes, standing in that fluorescent lit store while the clock on the wall ticked past 7:15. We paid. She didn't say goodbye. The door chimed as we left, a cheerful sound that felt wrong somehow. Outside, the sun had slid considerably lower. A thin line of orange sat above Shiprock's jagged silhouette, that volcanic plug rising from the desert floor like a broken tooth. The sky above it was deepening from blue to violet. We got in the Tacoma. Tyler adjusted the seat, checked the mirrors. I set my phone on the dash as a clock, watching the minutes display. That was all the planning we did. The first miles out of Shiprock were paved, then patched, then fractured into something that was more crack than asphalt, then finally just dirt. A few houses sat far apart from each other, each with a couple of vehicles in various states of decay, and a dog that barely glanced our way as we passed. Satellite dishes pointed at empty sky. Laundry hung motionless on lines. 10 minutes in, the homes thinned to nothing. The road stretched long and flat, shallow washboards rattling the cup holders and making our teeth click together. The desert up there isn't empty. You can see sage and juniper, distant messes, the bones of old fences, but it can feel empty when you don't see lights for minutes at a time. Everything looks the same. Gray-green brush, red dirt, rock formations that could be landmarks or could be nothing special. We kept the windows cracked to bleed the heat from the cab. The air smelled like dust and creosote, that distinctive desert smell that gets into your clothes and stays there. I told Tyler we should turn back if we didn't hit pavement by full dark. He said we had at least 30 minutes of usable light. Dusk was already proving him wrong. The shadows were lengthening, stretching east from every rock and plant. The sun was half gone behind Shiprock, and the temperature was starting to drop fast the way it does in the desert. The road split at a cattle guard with no sign, no indication which direction led where. Tyler chose left, keeping us generally north. The speedometer hovered around 40. Any faster and the washboard would rattle us apart. Any slower and we'd never reach the highway before dark. We hadn't seen another vehicle since leaving the last paved spur. No headlights ahead. No dust trails. Nothing. Somewhere out there. I couldn't say exactly where, because every mile looked like the last. The sun dropped behind Shiprock completely. We lost all color in an instant. The world went from golden edge to gray to almost black in the space of 5 minutes. Headlights cut a cone ahead of us, turning the dirt pale and somehow lifeless. The cab cooled by degrees. I pulled on a jacket. At 8:19, I started counting minutes, doing math in my head about how far we might have to go. We rounded a long, gradual bend, and she was there. A person in our lane, maybe 50 yards ahead, revealed gradually by the headlights like a photograph developing. Tyler braked. The Tacoma dipped forward, gravel skidding under the tires with a sound like tearing fabric. We rolled to a crawl. She looked young, maybe early 20s. Dark hair fell to her shoulders, uncombed, moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel through the cracked windows. She wore a pale shirt, white or light gray, hard to tell in the headlights, streaked with dust and patterns that looked like handprints. Bare legs from the knees down, bare feet on the dirt road, no shoes, no socks. One arm hung at her side, limp and motionless. The other raised in a slow, unsteady wave, palm out, then rotating inward, then back out again. The motion was mechanical, repetitive. No car, no driveway, no fence, no structure of any kind within visible range. Just her, standing in the middle of a dirt road in the dark desert, waving. "You seeing this?" Tyler's voice was tight. "Yeah." We closed the distance to maybe 20 feet, moving at walking speed now, close enough for details I didn't want. Her chin was low, shoulders rounded forward like she was cold or hurt. Her stance was uneven. The left foot seemed to hover slightly, like she couldn't or wouldn't put full weight on it. I reached for the window switch and stopped, my hand hovering over it. Something was wrong, and my body had decided before my brain could name it. We'd spent years stopping for people out here. Flat tires, dead batteries, hauling 5-gallon gas cans to ranchers who'd miscalculated. This was different. Every instinct I had was screaming wrong, wrong, wrong. The hair on my arm stood up. My throat felt tight. "We should pull past and call it in," I said. "Sheriff or tribal police?" "Yeah," Tyler agreed. He inched forward. She didn't move aside, didn't flag harder, didn't call out. Just kept that slow mechanical wave, her palm catching the headlights with each rotation. At 10 feet, I expected her face to change. Surprise at seeing us, relief, fear, anything. It didn't. Her lips looked split, darkened with what might have been dried blood or dirt. Her eyes stayed fixed past the bumper, not catching the light the way eyes should, not reflecting at all. The pupils seemed too large, swallowing the iris completely. I told myself there were reasons. Angle, dust on her face, the quality of the headlights, but the thought didn't help. My hands had gone cold despite the jacket. Tyler eased left to go around her. I watched her as we passed, unable to look away. She rotated at the waist like a door on a hinge, not a step, not shifting her feet, tracking us without moving anything below her ribs. It wasn't a natural movement. The human spine doesn't turn like that, shouldn't turn like that. We rolled on. Tyler checked the rear view. I watched the side mirror, my breath fogging the window. She turned farther, her body still facing the direction we'd come from. Her head swiveled almost 90 degrees. The brake lights lit her face red for a moment, Then dark again, when Tyler's foot came off the pedal. The expression wasn't vacant or angry or scared. Just wrong, misaligned somehow, like a mask worn slightly off-center. No shoulder. No lights, I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. Next intersection we call. Tyler nodded. He was gripping the wheel too hard. I could see his knuckles white even in the dim light from the dash. We brought the speed back up to 30, then 35. No service on my phone, not even one bar. No house within miles. Turning back meant driving past her again. Maybe stopping, walking up to her in the dark to ask if she needed help. Going forward meant hoping for a good decision point, a place with service, with lights, with other people. I wanted pavement, signs, gas stations, something fixed and normal and bright. We drove in silence. My hands were damp with sweat. My mouth was dry. I kept checking the side mirror, but there was nothing behind us except dust and darkness. Then, motion in the beams again. Same shirt, same dark hair, same shape. This time she was only 30 feet ahead when we saw her. There were no paths, no turnoffs behind us, no way for her to have gotten ahead of us. The road had been straight for the last mile, empty in both directions. We'd been moving at 35 miles per hour. She shouldn't be there, couldn't be there. My brain tried to make it work. Maybe we'd seen someone else. Maybe there were two people out here. But the shirt was identical, the hair the same length, the stance exactly as uneven. Tyler swore a single sharp word. He slowed just enough to steer wide, giving her space. As we drew level, maybe 6 feet of clearance between her and my door, she turned her head toward me. Not gradually. One sharp snap like a bird spotting prey. Up close, I saw dark marks on her forearm, distinct shapes that looked like finger impressions, like someone had grabbed her hard enough to bruise. 4 parallel lines, thumb opposite. Then we were past. Tyler accelerated harder than necessary. The engine whined. She stayed in the mirror longer than she should have, longer than physics allowed. Her arm finally dropped, but not in a normal way. It just fell, dead weight, swinging once before stopping. Then she bent forward at the waist, stiff and unnatural, her back rounding, but her legs staying locked straight. Like a mannequin being folded at a joint it wasn't meant to fold at. The dashboard clock read 8:27. I couldn't make any of this make sense. The possible explanations, twins, someone playing a prank, us somehow getting turned around, none of them fit. My heart was hammering. I could feel it in my throat, in my temples. Tyler's breathing had gone shallow and quick. We kept going. The road narrowed, brush crowding closer to the edges, branches scraping the passenger side with sounds like fingernails on metal. Then it widened again, opening into a broader valley. The sky ahead lightened slightly, a faint glow that promised the highway. Other cars, civilization. I told Tyler we'd stop at the first main road, first light, first anything. He nodded, eyes locked on the road ahead, hands still white-knuckled on the wheel. We hadn't seen her for 3 minutes. I'd been counting. When we crested a small rise and there she was. Closer now, offset toward our right headlight. Maybe 20 feet ahead. Arms raised overhead now, not waving. Head tilted so far forward her chin nearly touched her chest. Hair hanging down and obscuring her face. She swayed slightly, side to side like she was standing in water. I felt my mouth go completely dry. Tyler, I see her. I see her. His voice was flat, empty of the easy confidence it usually carried. He didn't slow much this time, just enough to control the vehicle. The raised arms weren't waving. They twitched at the wrists, small jerking movements that seemed involuntary. When we lined up with her level for just a moment, her head snapped up. Hair fell away from her face. Her eyes locked onto mine through the glass. They were completely black, no white visible at all, and they tracked me with absolute focus as we passed. In the mirror she pivoted faster than before. Her stance widened, feet spreading to shoulder width. She stepped toward us, one step, clear and deliberate. Then another. Then she was closing the distance faster than walking, faster than jogging, moving in a way that my brain couldn't quite process. Her right foot was dragging and snapping forward, dragging and snapping, but it didn't slow her down at all. She's moving, I said. My voice came out higher than normal. I'm not looking, Tyler replied. He pressed the accelerator harder. The Tacoma fishtailed briefly on loose gravel before straightening. I couldn't stop watching the mirror. She was still visible in our taillights, now running full out, arms swinging loose at her sides, head angled just enough to keep us in sight. The way she moved, it wasn't right. The rhythm was off, like watching a film with frames missing. The brush closed in on both sides, forcing us into a narrow corridor of dirt between walls of sage and juniper. Tyler took a bend too tight. The back tires kicked up a cloud of dust before he corrected, the wheel jerking in his hands. "Where's the highway?" he muttered. "Where the hell is the highway?" Movement ahead again. Coming toward us this time, not standing still. That same pale shirt materializing from the darkness. The limp had become a hop, then faster, then a full run. No vehicle had passed us. No side road. No possible way she should be here. Ahead of us, closing the gap. Tyler swerved left hard enough that my shoulder hit the door panel. He floored it. Her mouth was open wider now, impossibly wide. I could see teeth, too many teeth, even in white in the headlights. We hit 60 miles per hour, the wheel trembling in Tyler's hands, the washboard road threatening to rattle us into the ditch. She didn't reappear for a long stretch, 20 seconds, 30, but the sense of her stayed. That feeling of being watched, of being followed, of something behind us that was gaining. Then a flash of movement along the right side. Lower now. Not standing, not running upright, moving on all fours, matching our speed for what felt like forever but was probably only seconds. I caught glimpses between the brush, that pale shirt, dark hair streaming back, arms and legs moving in coordination like she'd always moved that way, like it was natural. Then she vanished into the dark brush beyond the headlight's reach. An impact hit the passenger door, sudden and hard. Not a bump, not brush scraping. An exhale deliberate with weight behind it. The door panel dimpled inward slightly. I turned, pressing myself back into the seat. She was there, level with my window, her face inches from the glass. Her arm was reaching, fingers splayed wide. I could see under her nails, dark crescents, or maybe the nails themselves were dark, too long, too thick. She was keeping pace at 60 miles per hour on all fours. Then she dropped back, falling away into the darkness behind us. The next crest put her dead center in the lane, maybe 40 feet ahead. On all fours still, but motionless now, waiting. Her face was tilted up at us, while her body stayed square to the road, spine curved in a way that made my stomach turn. Tyler took the right edge of the road hard, brush hammering the passenger side with impacts that sounded like fists on metal. As we came parallel, her head snapped toward me again, eyes still completely black, mouth still too wide, teeth too even, too white for someone who'd been in the desert, too perfect for the way she moved. We pulled ahead. Another impact slammed the door, harder this time. The glass vibrated but held. The sound was hollow, drum-like. I could feel it in my chest. Then the night changed. Light ahead, off to the left. Distant but unmistakable. Headlights on what had to be the highway. Red taillights moving in both directions. Civilization. Tyler stayed on it, the Tacoma bouncing hard enough that my head hit the roof. A T intersection appeared, marked with a faded stop sign barely visible in our high beams. He turned left toward the glow without stopping, without even slowing much. The tires scrabbled for purchase. In the mirror, she cut across behind us at an angle, moving fast enough that she was just a blur of pale shirt and dark hair. Then she was gone. Actually gone this time. The night behind us was empty. The new road was smoother, recently graded. We hit 65, then 70. The glow resolved into individual lights. Trucks, sedans, motorcycles. The highway, real and solid and full of people who weren't her. But then, one more time, she was in our lane ahead. Further out this time, maybe 100 yards. Tyler didn't brake, just took the far right edge of the road, practically in the ditch. In the high beams she lunged. She covered the distance in 3 bounds, each one impossibly long, angling for my door. I pressed myself back into the seat, one arm coming up instinctively. A hard, quick rake of sound ran along the door panel. Not brush, not rock, contact, deliberate. The sound of something sharp dragging across metal with pressure behind it. 3 distinct lines, parallel, evenly spaced. Then the dirt ended, and there was pavement. The change in sound was immediate and startling, from the constant rattle of dirt and gravel to smooth, quiet road noise. Tyler merged onto the highway without signaling. A green sign flashed past in the lights, Another promised a service area in 2 miles. Neither of us spoke. My hands were shaking. My heart was still pounding so hard I felt dizzy. We pulled into the service area under sodium lights that turned everything orange. There were maybe 6 other vehicles in the lot. A semi, a few passenger cars, an RV. Normal people doing normal things. Tyler parked away from the building, in a spot with good light. We sat there for a full minute without moving. When I finally opened the door, my legs felt weak. The marks on the passenger door looked worse under the artificial light. 3 parallel gouges down to the primer, each about 8 inches long. They weren't scratches from brush. They were too even, too deliberate. Each one had regularly spaced interruptions, like something had lifted and pressed down repeatedly while dragging. Dust flaked away at my touch, revealing metal underneath. My hand was shaking so badly I had to steady it with the other one. Inside, the service area was too bright and too warm and too normal. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A television played the weather. The cashier, Raymond, according to his name tag, looked up from a phone and asked if we'd been on the dirt roads. The door must have still been open behind us, the marks visible from where he stood. When I told him roughly where we'd been, his expression changed. Went from casual interest to something harder. "Don't stop on those roads after dark," he said. "Not advice, a rule. If someone needs help, you call from town. You don't stop, you don't get out." Another man was in the snack aisle. Older, maybe Navajo based on the turquoise jewelry he wore. He overheard and walked over, looked past us to the parking lot. "You boys need to look at your passenger side," he said quietly. "We already did," Tyler said. Raymond followed us to the door, arms crossed over his chest. Under the lights, the marks looked even worse. He studied them for a long moment. "If you feel like you need to talk to somebody, tell the Navajo Nation police exactly where you were, but don't go back, not to show anyone, not at all. Do you understand?" We understood. We got back in the truck and left. The drive to Durango was uneventful. Traffic was normal. The highway was well lit. Every mile that passed felt like waking up from a dream. Except the marks were still there on the door. Real. Undeniable. The farther we got from Shiprock, the more my mind tried to turn what happened into something ordinary. A person in distress. Confusion. Dust in our eyes. But the marks wouldn't let me. In daylight the next morning they were sharper. Cleaner. A faint bloom of rust had risen overnight in the exposed metal. Too fast for dry weather and intact paint. I rubbed one of the grooves with my thumb. The rust color came away faintly, like pressing on an old bloodstain. Later that week I told Thomas, a Navajo coworker from Farmington. He listened without interrupting, his expression carefully neutral. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You don't stop on those roads at night. You just don't. Sometimes what you see out there isn't a person, or it isn't only a person." He told me to wash the truck, to not show the marks off, and if I wanted to sleep better, to buy something small from a local vendor near where we'd come out. As a sign of respect, he said. For what? He didn't specify. The next weekend, Tyler and I drove back to that area. Daylight. Highway only. Plenty of traffic. We stopped at a roadside stand near the turnoff where we'd emerged. An older woman sold beadwork and carved animals from the back of a pickup. I bought a beaded keychain. Tyler bought a carved wooden fox. We didn't explain. We didn't negotiate the price. We said thank you, left cash, and drove away. I felt something in my shoulders let go, some tension I'd been carrying for days. The scratches never washed out, no matter what we tried. The rust stayed thin but visible. Eventually, Tyler got the door repainted. $600 at a body shop in town. The guy doing the work asked what had made marks like that. Tyler told him he didn't know. That was true enough. The keychain's been on my keys ever since. The fox is on Tyler's shelf next to a photo of his truck from before. We still take drives through the Four Corners, but never through that stretch. If traffic on the highway is bad, it's bad. You sit in it. You listen to podcasts or music or just the sound of the engine. You let the sun go down, surrounded by other people, other vehicles, lights in every direction. The ending is simple. We made it home. The marks cost money to fix. The memories didn't fade the way I hoped they would. I still check the mirrors more than I used to. Still get tense when the sun starts to drop and I'm not on a main road. Still remember that feeling of being watched, of being hunted, of something that shouldn't exist moving faster than it should, getting closer. I tell this story the way Raymond told it to us. Plain and simple. Don't stop on those roads after dark. If you think someone needs help, call it in from town. Keep your doors locked. Keep moving. Stay on the highway. The last time Tyler and I drove through that area, we passed the turnoff in daylight. He turned down the radio without being asked. No shortcuts, he said. Yeah, I said, no shortcuts. It's a simple rule. Not complicated, not hard to follow, but it's a rule that exists for a reason, taught by people who've seen things they don't talk about except in warnings to strangers at gas stations. And if you're smart, if you want to get home safe, you follow it. Every time, no exceptions. Because out there in the desert, on those dirt roads after dark, you might see someone who needs help. And you have to understand, really understand, that stopping might be the last decision you ever make. I learned the hard way that danger doesn't always bring a loud announcement. It can slide right into your day, disguised as a fleeting movement among the trees, or a quiet shift in the breeze that carries something rank and wrong. My name is Gideon Mercer. It was 2021, and it happened on the outskirts of Redwood Falls, Minnesota, while I was out hunting in late October with a muzzleloader I'd inherited from my grandfather. I'd been hunting since I was 16, guided by my uncle who taught me how to track whitetail trails and set up a proper blind. Back then, the biggest threat I worried about was losing my footing or running into a disgruntled raccoon near our camp. Now that I'm in my 30s, I still hunt for the satisfaction of providing my own game and for the solitude of it all. My buddies will tell you I'm a restless guy who likes to crack jokes when things get tense, and I'll admit I'm not the silent type. Sometimes that means my deer hunts are more about me telling stories than actually spotting a buck. That autumn, my best friend Manny joined me for the first few days. He's a father of 3, always juggling soccer practices and weekend chores, so he rarely gets a chance to head outdoors. He stayed in the campsite until Wednesday evening, then had to rush home for a family emergency. His youngest had come down with something nasty, fever spiking to dangerous levels. That left me alone in the thick patch of woods along the Redwood River. I figured I had the weekend to myself, and I planned to pack up Sunday morning. The farmland around Redwood Falls is mostly rolling terrain, dotted with pockets of oak and pine. The air smelled crisp and the leaves were turning brilliant shades of gold and scarlet. But underneath that autumn sweetness there was something else. A faint stench that reminded me of meat left too long in a warm car, though I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. The smell would come and go with the wind, making me wrinkle my nose and look around nervously. On Thursday morning I heard local chatter over my radio about a missing college student. The voice was tense, strained. Not the usual casual tone of park rangers coordinating routine searches. People were searching the trails near Ramsey Park, which wasn't too far from where I'd pitched my tent. I remember thinking it was strange. I'd heard rumors of missing hikers and campers in different parts of the state. But Redwood Falls isn't known for that kind of trouble. What made it stranger was how the radio chatter kept cutting out. Mid-sentence, the voices would dissolve into static, then return moments later with an edge of panic that hadn't been there before. We found her backpack, one voice crackled through, but there's no sign of struggle. It's like she just vanished. The radio went dead for a full minute after that. Still, I shrugged it off, assuming it was a misunderstanding or maybe someone just got lost. The area can be disorienting if you wander away from the main paths. What I didn't know then was that the missing student, a girl named Jessica from the local community college, had been found 3 days earlier. Her roommate had filed the report, but Jessica herself had called it in from her dorm room, confused and claiming she'd been in the woods for days. She had no memory of how she'd gotten back. No memory of the time in between. All she could remember were eyes, yellow eyes that reflected light like an animal's, but set in something that walked upright through the trees. That same day, I set out before dawn, carrying a thermos of black coffee and my old muzzleloader. The forest was too quiet, even for early morning. There should have been bird calls, the rustle of small animals, something. Instead, there was only the sound of my boots crunching on fallen leaves and the occasional groan of tree branches swaying overhead. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Around mid-morning, I found a good vantage point near a cluster of boulders that looked like they'd been arranged deliberately. The arrangement bothered me. 3 large stones forming a perfect triangle with a smaller one in the center, almost like some kind of primitive marker. I'd never noticed them before, despite hunting these woods for years. I settled in anyway and waited, scanning the tree line for the flicker of a tail or the glint of antlers. By noon, my stomach rumbled, but something else caught my attention first. Carved into the bark of a nearby oak were strange symbols, lines and circles that didn't look like typical hunting markers or lovers' initials. They were too deep, too deliberate, and they seemed to pull at my vision in an uncomfortable way. The longer I stared, the more they seemed to shift and writhe, until I had to look away with a sharp headache pounding behind my eyes. I decided to hike back to camp for a quick lunch, but on my way I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints that weren't mine or Manny's led deeper into the woods, but these weren't normal prints. They were spaced in impossibly long strides at least 6 feet apart, and the impressions were wrong. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. More disturbing was how the prints seemed to follow the path Manny and I had taken the day before, as if something had been tracking our movements, learning our routine. In several places, the prints stopped directly where we had stopped, lingered where we had lingered, then continued on our exact route. I'm not the bravest soul in the world, but curiosity got the better of me. Cradling my muzzleloader with sweaty palms, I followed the prints for maybe a quarter mile until they ended abruptly near a narrow creek. It was as if someone vanished into thin air. There weren't any signs of a scuffle, no scattered belongings, just a sudden stop. But the ground around the final print was disturbed in a perfect circle, as if something had spun in place before disappearing. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound like heavy breathing filtered through a broken whistle, coming from somewhere across the creek. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make my heart pound faster and my hands shake. I told myself it could have been wind through hollow trees, but deep down I knew better. Wind doesn't sound like it's trying to form words. That night I stayed up reading by flashlight inside my tent, thinking about the missing student and those impossible footprints. I tried to distract myself by flipping through an old hunting magazine, but my mind kept drifting back to those symbols carved in the oak and the way they seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Eventually, I dozed off, only to wake around midnight to that unnatural rasping sound, much closer now. At first I thought maybe a coyote was investigating my camp, but when I unzipped my tent enough to peek out, what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. In the pale moonlight I could make out a tall, impossibly thin silhouette standing at the very edge of the clearing. It was perfectly still, but somehow I knew it was watching me. Its head was cocked at an angle that would have broken a human neck, and its arms hung down past where its knees should be. Even from a distance I could see that its proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too angular, like someone had stretched a human being on a medieval rack until they snapped. I blinked hard, telling myself it was just shadows playing tricks. But when I looked again, the thing had moved closer. Not walked, moved. One moment it was at the tree line, the next it was near the cold remains of my campfire, still maintaining that unnatural stillness. That's when I realized what had woken me. It wasn't the sound of breathing, it was the sound of sniffing, like a bloodhound following a scent trail. My scent trail. I clamped my hand over my mouth to muffle my panicked breathing, and slowly, carefully, reached for my muzzleloader. The metallic click as I checked the firing mechanism seemed impossibly loud in the silence, and the creature's head snapped toward my tent with predatory precision. For a moment that felt like an eternity. We remained frozen, hunter and hunted, though I was no longer certain which was which. Then a branch snapped behind the thing, and it turned with fluid, inhuman grace. That's when I caught sight of its face in the moonlight, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying out. It wasn't a face at all. It was a skull, yellowed and cracked, with hollow sockets that somehow still managed to convey intelligence and hunger. Its jaw hung open in a permanent grin that revealed rows of teeth too sharp and too numerous for any earthly creature. The thing took one long stride toward the sound, a stride that covered nearly 10 feet, and vanished into the darkness between the trees. I stayed frozen in my tent for what felt like hours, listening to the unnatural silence that followed. Even the normal night sounds of the forest had gone completely dead, as if every living thing was holding its breath, waiting for the predator to pass. When morning finally came, I found deep gouges in the earth around my tent, forming a perfect circle. Something had been circling me all night while I slept, getting closer and closer with each pass. The gouges were too deep to be made by any animal I knew, and they had that same wrong quality as the footprints: too long, too narrow, ending in points that suggested claws designed for rending flesh from bone. But most disturbing of all was what I found at the center of the circle, right outside my tent flap. A small pile of bones, gnawed clean and arranged in that same triangular pattern I'd seen in the rocks. They were too small to be human, but too large to belong to any animal that should have been in these woods. And they were fresh. The marrow was still pink, still moist, as if something had been enjoying a midnight snack while it watched me sleep. I packed up my camp in record time, but even as I loaded my gear into my truck, I could feel eyes on me from the tree line. The feeling followed me all the way to the main road. A weight between my shoulder blades that made my skin crawl. In my rearview mirror, I could swear I saw something tall and thin step out from behind a tree, watching my retreat with what might have been disappointment. I drove straight to the local sheriff's office, but when I tried to report what I'd seen, the deputy just looked at me with tired eyes and asked if I'd been drinking. When I insisted I was sober, he pulled out a thick folder and showed me reports from the past 6 months. Missing hikers, abandoned campsites, and sightings of something the locals had started calling the tall thing in the trees. Every single report described the same impossible creature. Too tall, too thin, moving with an unnatural gait and leaving tracks that made no sense. Most witnesses were dismissed as drunk or delusional, but the pattern was clear. Something was hunting in the woods around Redwood Falls, and it was getting bolder. "Here's some free advice," the deputy said, sliding the folder back into his desk. "Stay out of those woods after dark. Hell, stay out of them, period. We've had 3 more missing persons reports just this week, and the search teams are finding things that don't make sense. Campsites torn apart from the inside out, footprints that start and stop with no explanation, and bones, always bones, arranged in patterns that give grown men nightmares." I left the sheriff's office with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that whatever I'd encountered was far from finished with me. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been marked somehow, chosen for reasons I couldn't understand. The sensation of being watched persisted even after I was safely locked inside my house, and I found myself checking the windows compulsively, looking for tall shadows that didn't belong. It would be 3 days before I realized the creature had followed me home. The paranoia started small. I'd catch myself checking locks twice, peering through blinds when I heard cars pass by my house, jumping at sounds that should have been familiar. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of yellow skull sockets and the sound of sniffing just outside my bedroom window. On Friday evening, I finally convinced myself I was being ridiculous. Whatever I'd seen in the woods had stayed in the woods, and I was letting my imagination run wild. That's when I decided to go back. I know how that sounds. After everything I'd experienced, after the warnings, after seeing that folder of missing persons reports. But something was pulling me back to those woods, a compulsion I couldn't explain or resist. I told myself it was curiosity, or maybe a need to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The truth was darker and more primitive than that. I felt like prey that had escaped a predator, and something deep in my lizard brain demanded I know where that predator was, what it was planning. Besides, it was broad daylight. Whatever that thing was, it seemed to prefer the cover of darkness. I'd be in and out before sunset, just a quick reconnaissance to put my mind at ease. I loaded my truck with more ammunition than any sane person would need for a day hike, and drove back to the woods with my heart hammering against my ribs. The first thing I noticed when I reached the trailhead was the smell. That rotten meat stench I'd detected earlier had intensified, becoming so thick and cloying it made my eyes water. A park ranger's truck was parked near mine, and I could see a man in uniform standing near the trail entrance, looking pale and shaken. "You heading in there?" he asked when he saw me gathering my gear. The ranger was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of outdoor tan that spoke of years spent in the wilderness. But his hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette, and he kept glancing over his shoulder at the tree line. "Just for a few hours," I replied, though something in his expression made me hesitate. "Everything okay?" He took a long drag and shook his head. "Found another campsite this morning, or what's left of one. 3 tents, all shredded from the inside out. Looked like something big had been trying to claw its way out. But," he paused, studying my face carefully, "but the zippers were still closed. Whatever did the damage was trapped inside with them." "The campers?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the sick look in his eyes. "Gone. No bodies, no blood, just torn fabric and those same impossible footprints circling the site. And bones, Christ, so many bones. Not human, thank God, but arranged in patterns that made my skin crawl, like some kind of ritual, or maybe a warning." He flicked his cigarette into the gravel and pulled out his radio. I'm calling in the state police, but between you and me, I don't think they're going to find anything that makes sense." The ranger's words should have sent me home immediately, but instead they only intensified my need to understand what was happening. I thanked him for the warning and headed into the woods, following a different trail than the one I'd used earlier. This path wound deeper into the forest, away from the areas most frequently visited by hikers and hunters. The trees here were older, their trunks thick enough to hide a person or something larger. Spanish moss hung from the branches like funeral shrouds, and the canopy was so dense that very little sunlight reached the forest floor. The temperature dropped noticeably as I walked deeper, and I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that I was being paralleled by something just out of sight. After about an hour of hiking, I found what I was looking for. Another abandoned campsite, but this one was different from the others. It wasn't destroyed or torn apart. Instead, it looked like it had been carefully preserved, as if whoever had left it intended to return. A small tent was perfectly pitched, its stakes driven deep into the earth with military precision. A sleeping bag lay neatly rolled beside it, and a metal pot sat beside the cold remains of a campfire. But the details were all wrong. The tent was covered in a thick layer of dust and spider webs that suggested it had been here for months, maybe longer. The sleeping bag was rotted through in several places, exposing stuffing that had been chewed and scattered by animals. Most disturbing of all were the scratches covering every surface. The tent fabric, the metal pot, even the rocks around the fire pit. They were deep and deliberate, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. The smell was worse here, concentrated and putrid, like something had died and been left to decompose in the summer heat. As I got closer, I realized the scratches weren't random. They formed symbols similar to the ones I'd seen carved into the oak tree, but more elaborate, more complex. They seemed to writhe and shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, creating an optical illusion that made my head throb. Inside the tent, I found a small backpack, still zipped shut. The fabric was rotten and falling apart, but I managed to open it carefully. What I found inside made my blood run cold. A driver's license belonging to someone named Michael, expired 3 years ago. A cell phone with a cracked screen and a dead battery, and a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, filled with increasingly erratic handwriting. The early entries were mundane, notes about hiking trails, weather conditions, wildlife sightings. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone grew darker and more desperate. Michael wrote about feeling watched, about finding strange arrangements of bones around his campsite, about hearing sounds in the night that didn't belong to any animal he knew. The final entries were barely legible, the handwriting deteriorating into frantic scrawls. "It's getting closer every night. I can hear it sniffing around the tent, trying to find a way in. The symbols don't work. They only seem to make it more interested. God help me. I think it's learning. Last night it spoke to me in my own voice, asking me to come out and play. I found more bones today, arranged in a perfect spiral around the camp. They're getting fresher. Some still had meat on them. I'm running out of food, but I'm too afraid to leave. What if it follows me home? What if it hurts someone I care about? It knows I'm reading this. I can feel it watching me write. It's standing just outside the firelight, so tall its head is lost in the trees. Its skull is grinning at me, and I swear to God it's nodding along as I write these words. I think it's enjoying this. I think it's been toying with me all along." The journal ended there, mid-sentence, the pen trailing off the page as if Michael had been interrupted. I sat back on my heels trying to process what I'd read. 3 years. This campsite had been here for 3 years, perfectly preserved like some kind of macabre museum exhibit. And somewhere in these woods, Michael's bones were probably arranged in one of those ritual patterns, picked clean by something that had all the time in the world to enjoy its games. That's when I noticed the photographs. They were scattered throughout the journal, Polaroid shots that had somehow survived the passage of time. The first few showed typical camping scenes. Michael setting up his tent, cooking over a fire, smiling at the camera with the carefree expression of someone enjoying a weekend in nature. But the later photos were different. In one taken at night with a flash, something tall and skeletal could be seen standing just at the edge of the light, watching the camp with empty eye sockets. Michael had circled it with a red pen and written day 4 in shaky handwriting. Another photo showed the bone arrangements he'd mentioned, spiraling out from his tent in increasingly complex patterns. But the most disturbing image was the last one. It showed Michael himself, But he looked wrong. His face was gaunt and hollow, his eyes wide with terror and something else, something that looked almost like recognition or acceptance. He was staring directly at the camera, but his expression suggested he was looking through it at something standing behind the photographer, something that had learned to operate a camera to preserve its favorite moments for later enjoyment. I shoved the photos back into the journal, and the journal back into the pack, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the zipper. I needed to get out of here, needed to report this to someone with more authority than a local deputy. But as I stood to leave, I heard something that froze me in place. The sound of sniffing, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere very close. I turned slowly, afraid of what I might see, and found myself staring at a wall of trees that seemed somehow different than they had moments before. The shadows between them were deeper, more substantial, and they seemed to shift and move independent of the wind. As I watched, one of those shadows detached itself from the others and took a step into the clearing. It was exactly as I'd seen it before, but in daylight the details were even more horrible. The creature stood at least 8 feet tall, its emaciated frame draped in tatters of what might once have been clothing. Its skull gleamed white in the filtered sunlight, and the empty sockets somehow managed to convey both intelligence and inhuman hunger. But it was the way it moved that truly terrified me. Fluid and graceful despite its unnatural proportions, like a marionette operated by an expert puppeteer. For a long moment we simply stared at each other across the abandoned campsite. I was acutely aware of my muzzle loader hanging heavy in my hands, but something told me that conventional weapons would be useless against this thing. It had been playing with Michael for weeks before it finally tired of the game. It had been watching me, learning my habits, my fears, and now it was ready for the next phase of whatever twisted entertainment it had planned. The creature tilted its skull head to one side, the gesture almost curious, almost human. Then it opened its jaw impossibly wide, and let out a sound that was part scream, part laugh, and part something else entirely. A sound of pure malevolent joy that echoed through the trees and seemed to go on forever. Birds exploded from the canopy in all directions, and small animals went crashing through the undergrowth in their panic to escape. But I couldn't move. The sound had paralyzed me, turned my legs to jelly and my mind to static. All I could do was stand there and watch as the creature began to walk toward me, each step covering an impossible amount of ground, its empty sockets fixed on my face with the intensity of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. That's when I heard the other sound. Engines coming up the trail fast. The park ranger's backup had arrived, and the creature heard them too. Its skull head snapped toward the sound, and for a moment its attention was diverted. That moment of inattention broke whatever spell had been holding me, and I found I could move again. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush like a panicked deer, branches tearing at my clothes and thorns ripping into my skin. Behind me, I could hear the creature moving through the trees with that fluid, inhuman grace, effortlessly keeping pace despite my desperate flight. But it wasn't trying to catch me. I realized with growing horror that it was hurting me, using the sound of its approach to guide my panic-driven flight in a specific direction, away from the approaching rescue team, deeper into the woods where it could hunt without interruption. I burst through a wall of brambles and found myself in another clearing. This one filled with the scattered remains of multiple campsites, tents in various stages of decay, backpacks torn open and their contents scattered, sleeping bags shredded into ribbon-like strips, and bones, so many bones, arranged in increasingly complex patterns that seemed to spiral inward toward a central point. At the center of the spiral was something that made my sanity reel, a structure built entirely from human remains, carefully assembled into what could only be described as a throne. Skulls formed the back and armrests, femurs and tibias created the seat and legs, and smaller bones had been woven together to form intricate decorative patterns. It was the work of something with infinite patience and a deeply twisted aesthetic sense. The creature emerged from the trees behind me, moving with casual confidence now that it had me where it wanted me. It approached its throne with something that might have been pride, running one elongated finger along the armrest, in a gesture that was almost tender. Then it turned those empty sockets back to me and opened its jaw in that terrible grin. But this time it spoke. The voice that emerged from its skull was a harmony of screams. Dozens of different voices layered over each other in a cacophony of terror and agony. I recognized some of them from missing persons reports on the news, others from voices I'd heard on hiking trails over the years. Michael's voice was there, begging to be let go, pleading for mercy that would never come. And underneath it all, something else. Something ancient and hungry that had been feeding on fear and despair for far longer than human memory. Gideon, it said. And hearing my name spoken in that chorus of the damned nearly broke my mind. I've been waiting for you to come back. We have so much to discuss, you and I. So many games to play. I raised my muzzleloader with hands that shook like autumn leaves. But the creature only tilted its head in that curious, almost amused gesture. Go ahead, it whispered in a dozen dying voices. Fire your little gun. See how much good it does. I've been shot before, Gideon. I've been stabbed and burned and buried and blessed by priests who thought they knew what evil looked like. I always come back. I always continue the hunt. The sound of engines was getting closer, but still too far away to matter. The creature took another step toward me, and I could smell the reek of decay rolling off it in waves. Up close I could see that what I'd taken for clothing was actually skin, human skin, stitched together into a grotesque parody of garments. Some of the pieces still had tattoos, birthmarks, scars that told the story of lives cut short for this monster's amusement. You're wondering what I want, it continued, and I could hear genuine curiosity in that terrible voice. Why I chose you, why I let you escape that first night. The truth is, Gideon, you impressed me. Most humans break so quickly, become so predictable. But you came back. Even after seeing what you saw, feeling what you felt, you returned to my woods. That shows a rare kind of courage. Or perhaps a rare kind of madness. The creature reached the center of the clearing and settled onto its throne of bones, which creaked ominously under its weight. From this vantage point, it loomed over me like some prehistoric judge preparing to pronounce sentence. I've decided to keep you, it said, and the casual tone made the words even more terrifying. Not to kill, that would be wasteful. Instead, you're going to help me hunt. You're going to be my herald, my prophet, spreading word of the tall thing in the trees to anyone foolish enough to listen. And when they inevitably come looking for proof, you'll guide them to me. Never. I managed to whisper, though my voice cracked on the word. The creature's laugh was like breaking glass mixed with dying screams. Oh, but you will, Gideon. You'll want to, eventually. I'm very persuasive, and I have all the time in the world to convince you. We'll start with your friend Manny, I think. He has such a lovely family. 3 children, wasn't it? Soccer practices and weekend chores? The mention of Manny's family sent ice through my veins. This thing knew about my life, my relationships, my connections to the world beyond these woods. It had been watching, learning, preparing for this moment when it would finally reveal itself and the true scope of its plans. How long have you been watching me? I asked, stalling for time while my mind raced for some way out of this nightmare. Since you were 16, it replied, and my blood turned to water. Your uncle brought you to these woods for the first time, taught you to track and hunt and survive. I was there watching from the shadows, learning your scent, your patterns. I've been patient, Gideon. I've watched you grow from a boy into a man, watched you develop the skills that will make you so useful to me. 16. It had been stalking me for nearly 20 years. A supernatural predator playing a game so long and complex that I'd never even suspected its existence. How many other people had it been watching? How many other lives had it been weaving into its web of horror? The sound of engines was very close now, and the creature's attention flickered toward the approaching noise. For just a moment, its focus wavered, and I saw my chance. Not to fight, that would be suicide. Not to run, it would catch me before I made it 10 feet. But to do something it wouldn't expect, something that might disrupt its carefully laid plans. I turned my muzzleloader around and pressed the barrel against my own temple. The creature's skull head snapped back toward me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something like surprise in those empty sockets. No, it said, and there was genuine alarm in its voice. No, that's not how the game is played. You don't get to choose when it ends. Watch me, I said, and I meant it. Whatever this thing had planned for me, for Manny's family, for all the other innocent people it intended to use me to lure into its web, I wouldn't be part of it. I'd rather die on my own terms than become a tool for something so fundamentally evil. But the creature was faster than I anticipated. One moment it was sitting on its throne of bones, the next it was directly in front of me, one elongated hand wrapped around the barrel of my gun with crushing force. The metal actually bent under its grip, and I heard bones in my finger crack as it wrenched the weapon away from my head. Clever, it hissed. bringing its skull close enough to mine that I could feel the unnatural cold radiating from its bones. But foolish. Did you really think I'd let you escape so easily? Did you think I hadn't planned for this contingency? The creature's other hand moved to my throat, not squeezing, just resting there with the promise of violence. Its touch was like ice, so cold it burned, and I could feel frost forming on my skin where its fingers made contact. I don't need you alive to be useful, Gideon. The dead serve just as well, sometimes better. They don't have inconvenient moral qualms about luring children into dark places. Its skull tilted again, studying my face with scientific interest. But the living are so much more entertaining. That's when the cavalry arrived. The sound of engines roared into the clearing as 3 park ranger vehicles burst through the tree line, their occupants already reaching for weapons as they took in the scene. The creature's head snapped toward them with predatory interest, and I felt its grip on my throat tighten fractionally. But instead of fear, I saw something else flicker through those empty sockets. Annoyance. This wasn't part of its plan. This wasn't how the game was supposed to be played. For something that had been orchestrating events for decades, the arrival of unexpected players was clearly a disruption it didn't appreciate. Run, I managed to whisper to the approaching rangers, though I wasn't sure they could hear me over the sound of their engines. Don't try to fight it, just run. The creature's laugh was like autumn wind through a cemetery. Oh, but Gideon, where's your faith in the forces of law and order? Surely these brave men and women can handle one thin monster in the woods. It released me and turned toward the rangers, spreading its arms wide in a gesture of mock welcome. Several of them had already drawn their weapons, but I could see the confusion and terror in their faces as they tried to process what they were seeing. This wasn't part of their training. This wasn't in any manual or protocol they'd studied. Gentlemen, ladies, the creature called out in its harmony of voices. How wonderful of you to join our little gathering. I was just explaining to my friend Gideon here how much I enjoy meeting new people. Please don't be shy. Step into my parlor. The rangers opened fire. The sound of gunshots echoed through the clearing like thunder, and I threw myself to the ground as bullets filled the air around the creature. But instead of falling, instead of bleeding, the thing just stood there and laughed. The bullets passed right through it, leaving no wounds, no marks, nothing but holes in the trees behind where it stood. My turn, it said. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The creature moved among the rangers like death incarnate, its elongated limbs striking with impossible speed and precision. But it didn't kill them, not immediately. Instead, it seemed to be playing with them, toying with their terror the way a cat plays with wounded mice. One ranger was lifted off his feet and held aloft while the creature studied him with scientific interest. Another was pinned to a tree by invisible force, screaming as the bark began to grow around his arms and legs, slowly consuming him. A third simply vanished, there one moment and gone the next, leaving only the echo of his terrified cry. But the worst was what happened to the young ranger who'd warned me at the trailhead. The creature approached him almost gently, reaching out with one skeletal finger to touch his forehead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the man's eyes went wide, and he began to scream in a voice that wasn't entirely his own. It's in my head, he gasped, clawing at his temples hard enough to draw blood. It's showing me things, oh God, it's showing me what it did to them. What it's going to do to me. The creature leaned down and whispered something in the ranger's ear. Something that made him stop screaming and start nodding with the enthusiasm of the converted. When it straightened up, the man's expression had changed completely. The terror was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like worship. Yes, the ranger said in a voice that was calm and rational and absolutely terrifying. Yes, I understand now. I see what needs to be done. 2 more rangers succumbed to whatever power the creature wielded, their expression shifting from fear to acceptance to eager anticipation. Within minutes, half the rescue team had been turned into willing servants, their minds twisted by whatever horrors the creature had shown them. The remaining rangers tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to run. The creature had positioned itself between them and the only way out of the clearing, and its new servants were already moving to flank them. I could see the hopelessness in their faces, the terrible understanding that they were going to die in this place, far from home and help. That's when I made the second stupidest decision of my life. I ran toward the creature, not away from it, hoping to create enough of a distraction for the remaining rangers to escape. I didn't have a weapon. My muzzleloader was still in the thing's grip, bent beyond repair, but I had rage, pure incandescent fury at this monster that had been stalking me for 20 years, that had murdered God knows how many innocent people, that was now threatening the only world I'd ever known. I collided with the creature at full speed, and it was like hitting a tree made of ice and bone. The impact sent me sprawling, but it also knocked the thing off balance for just a moment. Long enough for the surviving rangers to break for the tree line. Long enough for them to disappear into the woods with their radios and their stories, and their promise of reinforcements. The creature looked down at me with something that might have been amusement. "Heroic," it said in that terrible chorus of voices. "Foolish, but heroic. I can work with that." It reached down and lifted me effortlessly, holding me at eye level with its empty sockets. Up close I could see that the bone wasn't as solid as it appeared. There were hairline cracks running through the skull, dark fissures that seemed to shift and writhe as I watched. And deep in those fissures, I could see something moving, something that looked disturbingly like eyes. "The cavalry has been called," it continued conversationally. "More rangers, state police, perhaps even federal agents if those men tell their superiors what they've seen. But it doesn't matter, Gideon. This is my domain. These are my woods, and I've had decades to prepare for exactly this scenario." The converted rangers were already moving, spreading out through the forest with the easy confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. I had no doubt they would intercept any rescue teams long before they reached this clearing, would guide them into traps or simply convince them that there was nothing here worth investigating. "What are you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The creature's laugh was like wind through empty skulls. "I am what happens when hunger outlives flesh, when craving transcends death. I was human once, long ago, before I learned that there are appetites that can only be satisfied by taking everything someone else holds dear. I fed on fear, on despair, on the exquisite moment when hope dies in a human heart. And the more I fed, the more I needed, until feeding became all I was, all I could ever be." It set me down gently, almost tenderly, but I could feel the weight of its attention like a physical thing pressing down on my shoulders. "But you already knew that, didn't you, Gideon? Deep down, in the part of your mind that still remembers what your ancestors feared in the long dark nights. You know what I am because your species has been running from things like me since you first learned to make fire and tell stories." The creature was right. Looking at it now, seeing the way it moved, the way it spoke, the casual cruelty in every gesture, I understood exactly what I was facing. This wasn't just a monster. It was the monster, the one that lurked at the heart of every campfire tale, every whispered warning about things that hunted in the dark. It was the reason children were afraid of shadows, the reason adults locked their doors at night and told themselves they were being foolish. It was the Wendigo, the hunger that walks like a man. And I was already dead. The creature, the Wendigo, released me and stepped back. Its skull tilted in that curious, almost human gesture that made my skin crawl. Around us, the converted rangers continued their patrol of the clearing's perimeter, moving with the mechanical precision of puppets operated by an expert hand. Their eyes had gone flat and glassy, reflecting light like animal eyes caught in headlights, and they no longer looked entirely human. "Now then," the Wendigo said, settling back onto its throne of bones with obvious satisfaction. "Let's discuss the terms of our arrangement." "There is no arrangement," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I'll die before I help you hurt anyone." The thing's laugh was like breaking glass mixed with winter wind. "Oh, but you've already helped me, Gideon, more than you know. Your little heroic display just now. The way you charged in to save those rangers, absolutely perfect, very inspiring. The kind of story that spreads, the kind of legend that brings the curious and the brave flocking to my woods in search of answers." I felt ice form in my stomach as I realized the implications. Every person who heard about what happened here would want to investigate. Every thrill seeker, every paranormal investigator, every journalist looking for a story would come looking for the monster in the woods, and this thing would be waiting for them. "You planned this," I whispered. "The rangers arriving, the confrontation, everything. You wanted witnesses to escape." "Clever boy," the Wendigo purred. "Though I must admit your suicidal bravery was an unexpected bonus. Nothing brings hunters like the story of a man who faced a monster and lived to tell about it. They'll come looking for you, Gideon, wanting to hear your tale firsthand. And when they do..." It gestured with one skeletal hand toward the bone arrangements scattered throughout the clearing, and I understood. I would become its lure, its stalking horse, drawing the curious and the foolish into its web one by one. Even if I refused to cooperate, my very existence as a survivor would serve its purposes. The beauty of it, the creature continued, is that you won't be able to help yourself. Trauma has a way of demanding to be shared, doesn't it? The nightmares, the flashbacks, the overwhelming need to make someone else understand what you've been through. You'll tell your story, again and again, each time adding new details as your mind tries to process the impossible, and each telling will be a dinner bell, calling more prey to my table. I wanted to argue, to deny the horrible logic of its plan, but I could already feel the truth of its words settling into my bones. The urge to talk about what I'd seen, to make someone else understand the reality of the horror I'd encountered, was already growing inside me like a cancer. It would eat at me until I had no choice but to share it, no matter the consequences. But enough about the future, the Wendigo said, rising from its throne with fluid grace. We should discuss the present. Specifically, your education. If you're going to serve as my herald, you need to understand what you're representing. You need to know the full scope of what I am, what I've accomplished during my time in these woods. Before I could respond, the creature began to walk toward the edge of the clearing. Gesturing for me to follow, the converted rangers fell into step behind us, forming a grotesque honor guard as we moved deeper into the forest. I had no choice but to comply. Where could I run that it wouldn't find me? What was the point of resistance when it had already made its plans clear? The deeper we went, the more wrong the forest became. Trees grew in impossible configurations, their branches twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. The ground was carpeted with bones of every size and description, arranged in patterns that seemed to shift and change when observed peripherally. The air itself felt thick and oppressive, heavy with the weight of accumulated suffering. "Welcome to my gallery," the Wendigo said with obvious pride. 23 years of careful curation, of artistic expression through the medium of human terror. Each display represents a different approach, a different experiment in the cultivation of fear. We stopped before a circle of pine trees whose bark had been carved with symbols similar to those I'd seen before, but far more elaborate. The carvings seemed to writhe and pulse with their own inner light, creating optical illusions that made my eyes water and my head pound. At the center of the circle was a wooden post, perhaps 8 feet tall, with iron chains hanging from the top. "This is where I keep the ones who try to run," the Wendigo explained conversationally. "The chains aren't really necessary. By the time they end up here, they're far too broken to attempt escape. But the symbolism is important. The psychological impact of seeing yourself chained helps break down the last vestiges of hope." Around the base of the post, the ground was dark with old stains that I didn't want to think about. But it was the objects scattered in the grass that truly made my gorge rise. Personal effects from dozens of victims. Watches, rings, photographs of loved ones, children's toys. Each item carefully preserved, arranged in neat rows like a museum exhibit dedicated to lives cut short. "I keep these as reminders," the creature continued, noticing my horrified stare. "Each piece tells a story, represents a moment when someone realized their old life was over and their new existence was about to begin. This watch belonged to a hiker named Robert, who thought he could negotiate with me. The ring came from a young woman named Sarah, who offered me her soul in exchange for her boyfriend's life. The teddy bear..." It paused, picking up a small brown toy that had seen better days. The teddy bear belonged to a little girl whose parents brought her camping in my woods. They thought the fresh air would be good for her asthma. The casual, almost fond tone in which it related these atrocities made them infinitely worse than if it had boasted or threatened. This wasn't a creature driven by rage or madness. It was something that had turned suffering into an art form, that found genuine pleasure in the careful orchestration of terror and despair. We moved on, and the Wendigo showed me more of its gallery. A cave where it kept the ones who broke too quickly, their minds shattered by exposure to truths too terrible for human consciousness to process. A clearing where trees had grown through the rib cages of still living victims, their roots slowly consuming flesh while keeping the heart beating. A small pond whose waters had been turned red by decades of feeding, and where pale shapes moved just beneath the surface. "The aquatic ones are particularly interesting," the creature mused, watching my horrified expression as something with too many teeth breached the surface briefly before disappearing again. I've been experimenting with different preservation techniques. The cold slows decomposition, allows me to keep them functional for months or even years. They make excellent sentries. Nothing crosses this pond without my knowledge. By the time we completed the tour, the sun was beginning to set, and my sanity was hanging by threads. I'd seen horrors that defied description, witnessed evidence of cruelty so systematic and deliberate that my mind kept trying to reject it as impossible. But the worst part wasn't the suffering, it was the artistry. This creature hadn't simply killed these people, it had crafted their deaths into something resembling beauty, had turned their agony into a twisted masterpiece that it contemplated with the pride of a Renaissance sculptor. "Impressive, isn't it?" the Wendigo said, as we returned to the bone-thrown clearing. "And this is just one small section of my domain. I've been busy for decades, Gideon, perfecting my techniques, exploring new frontiers in the cultivation of fear. But I've always worked alone, been limited by my singular perspective. That's where you come in." The creature settled back onto its throne, studying me with those empty sockets. "You're going to help me expand my reach, bring new subjects to my laboratory. But more than that, you're going to help me understand them. Human psychology has evolved since I was mortal. New fears, new weaknesses, new ways to break a mind. You'll be my guide to the modern world of terror." "I won't do it," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "I won't help you hurt people." "Oh, but you will," it replied with absolute certainty. "Not immediately, perhaps. You'll resist at first, cling to your outdated notions of morality and human dignity. But I have time, Gideon. So much time, and I have ways of being persuasive." The creature gestured to one of the converted rangers, who immediately stepped forward with the eager compliance of a trained dog. "Tell him, James," it commanded. "Tell him what you've seen." The ranger James turned toward me with eyes that reflected the dying light like mirrors. When he spoke, his voice was calm and rational, but the words that emerged were anything but. "It showed me the truth," he said with the enthusiasm of a recent convert, "about what humans really are deep down, about the things we're capable of when pushed far enough. I've seen children turn on their parents, lovers betray each other for the promise of one more day of life. I've watched civilized people become animals, watched animals become something worse than monsters, and the beautiful thing is, it's all choice. Every act of cruelty, every betrayal, every moment when someone chooses their own survival over another's, it's all voluntary." The ranger's smile was the most terrifying thing I'd seen all day, because it was genuine. This wasn't a man driven mad by horror, it was someone who had been shown something that convinced him the horror was justified. "The creature isn't the monster, Gideon," James continued. "It's just the catalyst. The real monsters are us, have always been us. It simply creates the conditions that allow our true nature to emerge." "That's not true," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. I'd seen enough of the world, enough of human nature at its worst, to know that there was truth in the ranger's words. Given the right pressure, the right circumstances, anyone was capable of terrible things. "Isn't it?" the Wendigo asked, and I could hear amusement in its voice. "Tell me, Gideon, what would you do to save your friend Manny's children? How far would you go? What lines would you cross, if their lives hung in the balance?" The question hit me like a physical blow, because I already knew the answer. I would do anything, become anything, sacrifice anyone else if it meant protecting those innocent kids. The realization opened a dark door in my mind, one I'd always known was there but had never wanted to acknowledge. "I see you understand," the creature continued. "Good. That's the beginning of wisdom, the first step toward accepting your true nature. Everyone has a breaking point, Gideon. Everyone has a price. The only question is what currency they'll accept in exchange for their soul." The sun had fully set now, and the clearing was lit only by an unnatural phosphorescence that seemed to emanate from the bone arrangements themselves. In that eerie light, the Wendigo looked less like a creature and more like a force of nature, an inevitable consequence of human existence rather than an external threat. "I'm going to give you a choice," it said, leaning forward on its throne. "A real choice, with real consequences, so you can begin to understand the kinds of decisions you'll be helping others make in the future." Two of the converted rangers stepped forward, dragging something between them. As they came closer, I realized with growing horror that it wasn't something, it was someone. A young woman, probably in her 20s, with hiking gear and a backpack that marked her as another victim who'd wandered too close to the Wendigo's domain. But she was alive. Unconscious but breathing. her chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of natural sleep. The first living victim I'd seen since this nightmare began, and I could already guess why the creature was showing her to me. "This is Jennifer," the Wendigo said, conversationally, a graduate student from the university, here to study the ecological impact of the missing persons incidents on local wildlife populations. Ironic, really. She was so close to understanding what was really happening, had even begun to suspect that the disappearances weren't entirely random, but she made the mistake of coming alone, of thinking her scientific training would protect her from whatever was out here. The creature gestured, and the rangers placed Jennifer on the ground between us, arranging her limbs with the careful precision of morticians preparing a body for viewing. "Your choice is simple," the Wendigo continued. "You can save her. Right now, this instant, I'll let you walk away with this young woman. You can carry her out of my woods, take her to safety, be the hero who rescued an innocent from the monster in the forest." I felt a surge of hope, quickly crushed by the creature's next words. "Of course, if you do that, I'll simply find someone else to serve as my herald. Someone less morally constrained. Perhaps your friend Manny. He has such a practical nature, and 3 children provide excellent leverage. I'm sure I can make him see reason much more quickly than you." The trap was perfect. Save Jennifer, and doom Manny and his family. Refuse, and watch an innocent woman die while gaining nothing. Either choice would break something essential inside me, would start me down the path toward becoming the kind of person the creature needed me to be. "But wait," the Wendigo said with mock surprise. "There's a third option, one that might appeal to your heroic nature." It gestured toward the forest, and I heard the sound I'd been dreading. Voices, human voices, calling Jennifer's name. Her research team, or maybe just friends who'd grown worried when she didn't return. They were out there in the dark, getting closer to the clearing, walking straight into the monster's web. "Save them all," the creature suggested. "Guide them away. Convince them to leave my woods and never return. All you have to do is tell them a story about a monster in the forest, about the terrible things you've seen. Make them believe, make them afraid, and they'll run. Jennifer lives, your friend remains safe, and everyone goes home." "What's the catch?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. The Wendigo's grin was visible even in the dim phosphorescent light. "No catch at all, just consequences. The story you tell tonight will spread, as stories do. Other people will hear it, become curious, want to investigate for themselves. Some will dismiss it as fantasy, but others, the brave ones, the foolish ones, the ones who think they're cleverer than the monster, they'll come looking. And you'll be waiting." "I'll be waiting," it confirmed. "But that's not your concern, is it? Your concern is saving the people who are here, now, tonight. What happens to strangers in the weeks and months to come isn't your responsibility." The voices were getting closer, and I could hear the growing panic in their calls. Jennifer's research team, probably graduate students like herself. Young people with their whole lives ahead of them were walking into hell with no idea what awaited them. And the only way to save them was to become exactly what the Wendigo wanted me to be. Its herald, its prophet, spreading the fear that would eventually lure others to their deaths. Jennifer stirred on the ground between us, her eyes fluttering open in confusion. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak croak. The rangers had probably drugged her, kept her unconscious during transport to preserve her for this moment of terrible choice. "Gideon," she whispered, somehow knowing my name despite the fact that we'd never met. "Please, help me." The voices in the forest were very close now. 3 people, maybe 4, following what they thought was Jennifer's trail. They'd be in the clearing within minutes, and once they arrived, their fate would be sealed. The Wendigo was ancient and patient and impossibly cunning. It had had centuries to perfect the art of trapping human prey. Unless I stopped them, unless I became the monster's willing accomplice in exchange for their temporary safety. "Choose quickly, Gideon," the creature urged. "My patience, while considerable, is not infinite, and Jennifer's friends are about to join our little gathering, whether you cooperate or not." I looked down at Jennifer, saw the terror and hope warring in her eyes. Then I looked toward the forest, toward the approaching voices of people who trusted their world to make sense, who believed that knowledge and preparation could protect them from anything. Finally, I looked at the Wendigo, sitting on its throne of bones with the satisfied air of a chess master who just announced checkmate. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It never had been. I opened my mouth and began to scream. Not words, not warnings, just pure primal terror given voice. The sound that emerged from my throat was barely human, a noise of such concentrated fear and despair that it seemed to make the very air vibrate with anguish. It was the sound of a man watching his soul die, the death rattle of conscience being strangled by necessity. The effect was immediate. The voices in the forest cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of running feet crashing through the underbrush in full retreat. Whatever Jennifer's friends had heard in my scream, they understood it on a level deeper than conscious thought. The primordial part of their brains that still remembered what it meant to be prey had taken control, overriding curiosity and concern in favor of immediate, overwhelming flight. The Wendigo applauded slowly, the sound of bone striking bone echoing through the clearing like castanets. "Excellent," it said with genuine approval. "Truly inspired. I couldn't have asked for a more effective performance. Your friends are already miles away by now, running back to their cars, their phones, their comfortable illusion of safety. They'll remember that scream for the rest of their lives. Tell others about the night they heard the sound of a man's soul breaking in the woods." I fell to my knees beside Jennifer, my throat raw from screaming, my mind reeling from what I'd just done. I'd saved them. Jennifer's friends were alive, safe, free to return to their normal lives. But in doing so, I'd taken my first step down a path that had no turning back. I was the Wendigo's herald now, whether I wanted to be or not. "Help me understand something," Jennifer whispered, her voice stronger now as the drugs wore off. "What's happening here? What is that thing?" I looked into her eyes, saw the trust there, the belief that I would tell her the truth, and somehow make it all make sense. But the truth was a luxury I could no longer afford. The Wendigo was watching, waiting to see how completely I'd embrace my new role. "I don't know," I lied, and the words tasted like ashes in my mouth. "I woke up here just like you did, but we need to be very quiet, very still. I think it's gone for now, but it might come back." The lie came so easily, felt so natural, that I understood with crystal clarity how people became monsters. Not through grand dramatic moments of moral collapse, but through tiny compromises, small betrayals of conscience that accumulated until original sin became original nature. Jennifer nodded, accepting my deception with the trusting gratitude of someone who believed she was being rescued. She had no idea that her salvation was really just the beginning of a longer, more elaborate torture that I would shepherd her out of these woods only to ensure she'd tell her story to others, spreading the fear that would eventually bring new victims to feed the creature's endless hunger. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, she would live. Tonight, her friends were safe. And if the price was my soul, and the lives of strangers I'd never meet, well, that was a cost I'd have to learn to accept. The Wendigo rose from its throne and approached us both, moving with that fluid, predatory grace that suggested violence was always only a heartbeat away. "Welcome to the family, Gideon," it said, and its voice was warm with genuine affection. "I think we're going to accomplish great things together." As if to seal our partnership, it reached out with one skeletal finger and touched my forehead. The contact was like being struck by lightning made of ice, and for a moment I saw everything. The full scope of its plans, the intricate web of fear and manipulation it had been weaving for decades. I saw myself as it saw me. Not a victim, but a valuable asset, a tool perfectly crafted for the work that lay ahead. I saw the future it envisioned, a future where the woods around Redwood Falls became a pilgrimage site for thrill seekers and paranormal investigators, where my story would spread like wildfire across the internet, drawing more and more prey to its domain. And underneath it all, I saw the terrible truth that the converted Ranger James had glimpsed. That human nature, when stripped of its comfortable illusions, was capable of horrors that made the Wendigo look like a crude amateur. The creature wasn't corrupting us. It was simply creating conditions that allowed our true selves to emerge. When the vision ended, I found myself changed. Not converted. Not yet. But opened. The door in my mind that had cracked when I realized what I'd do to save Manny's children had been torn wide, and through it I could see possibilities I'd never allowed myself to contemplate before. "Now then," the Wendigo said, settling back onto its throne with obvious satisfaction, "let's discuss your first assignment." Dawn came slowly to the bone throne clearing, filtered through a canopy that seemed thicker than it had the day before, as if the trees themselves had grown during the night to block out more of the sun. Jennifer had fallen into an exhausted sleep against my shoulder sometime around 3 in the morning, her body finally succumbing to whatever cocktail of drugs the converted Rangers had used to keep her compliant. I envied her unconsciousness. It meant she didn't have to listen to the Wendigos' plans. The creature hadn't slept, of course. Things like it didn't need rest. Only the constant feeding of their insatiable hungers. It had spent the dark hours describing my new responsibilities in loving detail, painting a picture of the future that made my stomach clench with sick anticipation. Your story will be irresistible, it had explained in that chorus of stolen voices. A man who survived an encounter with the impossible, who walked out of the woods carrying a rescued victim. The media will eat it alive. Local news first, then national attention as the story spreads online. Everyone will want to hear the details, to understand how you managed to escape what so many others could not. The worst part was how much sense it made. In our connected world, where every mystery was only a Google search away and every urban legend had its own subreddit, a story like mine would spread faster than wildfire. The more outrageous the claims, the more people would come looking for proof, and the Wendigo would be waiting for them. The key, it continued, is to get the details just wrong enough to be compelling. Too accurate, and you sound delusional. Too vague, and you fail to capture the imagination. But strike the perfect balance between credibility and impossibility, and you'll have treasure hunters and thrill-seekers flocking to these woods like pilgrims to a holy site. I'd asked why it needed me at all. Why not just let random people stumble across its domain and take their chances? The creature's laugh had been like wind through a graveyard. Random encounters lack artistry, Gideon. They're crude, inefficient, wasteful. But a carefully crafted narrative spread through the right channels reaches exactly the kind of people I want to meet. The curious ones, the brave ones, the ones who think they're clever enough to outwit a monster. Those are the subjects that provide the best entertainment. Now, as the sun finally penetrated the clearing enough to wake Jennifer, I watched her face as she took in her surroundings with fresh eyes. The bone arrangements that I'd grown accustomed to overnight hit her with their full horrific impact, and I saw her expression shift from confusion to understanding to terror in the span of heartbeats. "Oh God," she whispered, pressing closer to me. "Oh God, what is this place?" Before I could answer, the Wendigo rose from its throne and approached us both. In the morning light, it looked even more wrong than it had in darkness. The bones that comprised its frame were yellowed and cracked, held together by something that wasn't quite sinew and wasn't quite shadow. Its skull gleamed with an oily sheen that suggested recent feeding, and the empty sockets seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. "Good morning, Jennifer," it said, and hearing her name spoken in that harmony of voices made her whimper. "I trust you slept well. We have so much to accomplish today. What do you want with us?" she asked, though I could hear the breakdown starting in her voice. The human mind wasn't designed to process horrors of this magnitude. Most people who encountered the Wendigo either went insane or died quickly. The few who survived did so by accepting a fundamental change in their understanding of reality. "Want?" the creature mused, settling into a crouch that brought its skull level with our faces. Such a simple word for such a complex relationship. "I want you to live, Jennifer. I want you to return to your comfortable academic world and tell everyone what you've seen. I want you to write papers about the psychological impact of extreme trauma, to become an expert on survival horror and the folklore of fear." Its empty sockets turned toward me, and I want Gideon here to become famous. The man who walked into hell and brought back proof that monsters are real. The survivor whose story is so compelling, so perfectly balanced between truth and impossibility that it draws seekers from around the world. "You're insane," Jennifer said, but there was no real conviction in her voice. She was already beginning to understand the scope of what she was dealing with, the careful intelligence behind the creature's plans. "Insane?" The Wendigo's laugh was like breaking glass. "Perhaps, but I prefer to think of myself as dedicated. I've spent decades perfecting the art of fear, learning exactly which pressures to apply and when. Most humans break in predictable ways, but occasionally I encounter someone special, someone with the strength to survive intact, to carry my message back to the world." It reached out with one skeletal finger and touched Jennifer's cheek with surprising gentleness. She flinched but didn't pull away. There was nowhere to go, and we both knew it. "You're special, Jennifer. Your academic background, your research into the missing persons cases, your natural tendency to document and analyze, you're perfectly positioned to serve as my witness. People will believe you because you're credible, trained to observe and report accurately. When you describe what you've seen in these woods, it will carry the weight of scientific testimony. I won't do it, she said, but I could already hear the doubt creeping into her voice. I won't help you hurt people. Oh, but you will, the creature replied with absolute certainty. Because the alternative is watching Gideon die, slowly, painfully, while you survive to remember every detail of his suffering. The human capacity for self-sacrifice is admirable but limited, Jennifer. Everyone has a breaking point. The Wendigo turned its attention back to me. Speaking of which, it's time for your first field test. I have a group of paranormal investigators arriving this afternoon. 3 men who think they're going to document proof of my existence. They've been planning this expedition for months, gathering equipment and doing research. They're exactly the kind of subjects I need for my expanded operations. I felt ice form in my stomach. How do you know they're coming? The creature's grin was visible even without lips to frame it. Because I invited them, of course. Through intermediaries. Through carefully placed clues and anonymous tips. Do you think my influence extends only to these woods? I have followers in the outside world, Gideon. People who've survived encounters with me and learned to serve my interests. They've been preparing the ground for your debut. One of the converted rangers stepped forward. Not James, but another man whose eyes held that same flat, glassy stare. He was carrying a modern video camera and what looked like electromagnetic field detectors, equipment that had obviously been taken from previous victims. The investigators will be looking for specific evidence, the Wendigo continued. Electromagnetic anomalies, temperature variations, audio recordings of unnatural sounds. We're going to give them exactly what they came for, and more than they bargained for. You want me to guide them here, I said, understanding beginning to dawn with horrible clarity. Eventually, yes. But first you're going to establish your credentials as a survivor. You'll encounter them on the trail. Warn them about the dangers. Tell them about your own harrowing escape. They'll be intrigued rather than deterred. Men like these always think they're smarter than the people who came before them. The creature began to pace around us, its movements fluid and predatory. You'll offer to guide them to the safe areas, the places where they can conduct their research without encountering the true horror. But of course there are no safe areas in my domain. Every path leads eventually to this clearing. Every trail winds its way back to my throne. And when they realize they're lost, Jennifer asked, her scientific mind already working through the logistics despite her terror. That's when the real fun begins, the Wendigo replied. I'll separate them, isolate them, show each one sites specifically tailored to break their individual psyche. The leader is afraid of being buried alive. I have a lovely cavern system that will accommodate that phobia. The youngest has recurring nightmares about drowning. My pond dwellers are always hungry for new playmates. The third, well, he has issues with trust, with being betrayed by people he depends on. The creature's empty sockets fixed on me with obvious meaning. That's where you come in, Gideon. Nothing breaks a man's spirit quite like being led to his doom by someone he trusted to keep him safe. I won't do it, I said, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. I won't betray innocent people. Innocent? The Wendigo tilted its skull to one side. These men have spent years hunting for supernatural entities, placing themselves in danger and encouraging others to do the same through their online videos and podcasts. They've already caused 3 deaths that I know of. Followers who tried to replicate their investigations and found more than they bargained for. Are they really so innocent? The question hit me like a physical blow because I recognized the logic. It was the same rationalization I'd used the night before when I chose to save Jennifer's friends by screaming. Sometimes bad choices were the only choices available, and the best you could hope for was to minimize the damage. Besides, the creature continued, you've already made your decision. The moment you chose to scream instead of warning Jennifer's friends directly, you became my accomplice. There's no going back now, Gideon. There's only forward, deeper into the web we're weaving together. A sound from the forest interrupted the conversation. The distant rumble of engines growing closer. The investigators were arriving ahead of schedule, their eagerness to document the supernatural overriding their caution. The Wendigo's skull turned toward the sound with obvious anticipation. Showtime, it said, and there was genuine excitement in its voice. Remember, Gideon, your survival depends on their deaths. The more convincingly you play your role, the more likely you are to see another sunrise. And if you should decide to warn them, to break character and tell them the truth, the creature gestured toward Jennifer. and I watched in horror as several of the converted rangers stepped forward to surround her. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, like a hive mind in action. Jennifer becomes my next conversion project, and unlike you, she won't have a choice about cooperation. The threat was clear. Play my part, guide the investigators to their doom, and Jennifer would be allowed to leave with her mind intact. Refuse, and she'd join the ranks of the converted, her consciousness twisted into willing service of the creature's goals. The sound of engines was much closer now, and I could make out voices. 3 men, probably in their 30s, discussing their equipment and plans with the casual confidence of people who thought they understood what they were dealing with. They had no idea they were about to encounter something that would redefine their understanding of reality, assuming they lived long enough for such redefinition to matter. Go, the Wendigo commanded, settling back onto its throne. Meet them on the trail, establish contact, begin the process. Remember, you're a survivor, traumatized but credible. You want to help them, but you're also afraid. Let that fear show. It will make your warnings more believable, and their eventual dismissal of those warnings more inevitable. I looked back at Jennifer one last time, saw the trust in her eyes, the belief that somehow I would find a way to save us both. The weight of that trust was crushing, because I knew I was about to betray it in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But what choice did I have? The Wendigo had been planning this encounter for months, possibly years. It had identified the investigators, learned their weaknesses, prepared contingencies for every possible response. I was just one more tool in its arsenal, albeit a newly acquired one. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking from more than just prolonged sitting. The creature watched me with obvious satisfaction, reading my body language like an open book. It knew I would comply, knew I would do exactly what it wanted. Not out of conversion or corruption, but out of simple, overwhelming necessity. Excellent, it murmured as I started toward the tree line. I can see you're beginning to understand the reality of your situation. That's good, Gideon. Acceptance is the first step toward true effectiveness in this role. The voices were very close now, maybe a quarter mile away. I could hear them discussing their electromagnetic readings, their excitement building as they detected the anomalies that surrounded the Wendigo's domain. They thought they were closing in on the discovery of a lifetime. They had no idea the discovery was closing in on them. I paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back one more time. The Wendigo sat motionless on its throne of bones, surrounded by the evidence of decades of systematic horror. The converted rangers stood at perfect attention, their humanity subsumed into willing service. And Jennifer sat on the ground where I'd left her, staring after me with growing understanding of what I was about to do. Remember, the creature called out softly. You're trying to save them. The fact that your efforts will ultimately fail isn't your fault, it's just the nature of the game we're playing. But as I walked into the forest to meet the investigators, I realized the Wendigo was wrong about one thing. I wasn't trying to save them. I was trying to save Jennifer, trying to preserve what remained of my own soul, trying to find some way to live with the choices I was being forced to make. The investigators would die. That was inevitable now, written into the fabric of this nightmare from the moment they'd decided to come looking for monsters in the woods. But maybe, if I played my role perfectly, their deaths would purchase something valuable. Maybe Jennifer would survive. Maybe she'd carry word of what she'd seen back to the world. And maybe that would be enough to keep others away from these woods. It was a thin hope, probably a false one, but it was all I had left. The voices were very close now, and I could see movement through the trees. 3 figures in hiking gear, carrying expensive-looking equipment. They were following a trail that would bring them directly past my position in another few minutes, and I needed to be ready. I took a deep breath, let the fear and desperation show on my face, and stumbled out of the underbrush to meet them. Time to become the Wendigo's herald, to take my first real steps down a path that had no turning back. Time to discover exactly what kind of man I was when survival was on the line. The first investigator to spot me was a tall, bearded man in his 30s, carrying what looked like a high-end thermal imaging camera. His eyes lit up when he saw me. Here was a local, someone who might have information about the supernatural activity they'd come to document. "Hey there," he called out, approaching with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to talking to strangers. "I'm David. These are my colleagues, William and Thomas. We're investigating reports of unusual phenomena in this area. Have you seen anything strange lately?" I let myself sway slightly. as if exhaustion and trauma were catching up with me. Strange? I laughed, and there was genuine hysteria in the sound. Mister, you have no idea what strange is. You need to get out of these woods. Now. Today. Before dark. The three men exchanged glances, and I could see their excitement building. A traumatized local with warnings about supernatural dangers was exactly what they'd been hoping to find. What did you see? Thomas asked, pulling out a digital recorder. Can you describe it for us? I looked around nervously, as if afraid we were being watched, which we probably were. The Wendigo had eyes everywhere in these woods, both human and otherwise. Something that shouldn't exist, I said, letting my voice crack. Something that's been killing people for years, taking them apart piece by piece. I barely got out alive, and I only managed that because I paused, looking directly at David with haunted eyes. Because it wanted me to. It wanted me to leave, to tell people what I'd seen. God help me, I think I'm doing exactly what it wants. The investigators were practically vibrating with excitement now. This was better than they'd dared hope for. A first-hand witness to whatever was causing the disappearances in these woods. Will you take us there? William asked. Show us where you encountered this entity. I shook my head violently. No, absolutely not. I'm trying to save your lives here. You need to leave, go back to your cars, drive away, and never come back. But I could see in their eyes that my warnings were having the opposite effect. The more I protested, the more determined they became to investigate. Human nature, predictable as clockwork. Tell someone they can't have something and they'll immediately want it more than anything else in the world. Look, David said, his voice taking on a reasonable, persuasive tone. We understand you've been through something traumatic, but we're professionals. We have experience with this kind of phenomenon, and we have equipment that can protect us. If there really is something dangerous out there, then people need to know about it. And if we can document it, Thomas added, maybe we can find a way to stop it. The terrible thing was, they believed what they were saying. These weren't glory seekers or thrill junkies. They genuinely thought they were performing a public service, using their skills and equipment to investigate supernatural threats. The Wendigo had chosen its victims well. I let myself waver, as if their arguments were beginning to sway me. You don't understand, I said. This thing, it's been killing people for decades. Hunters, hikers, campers. It takes them apart while they're still alive. Keeps them conscious while I shuddered, the reaction only half feigned. The things I saw in its lair, the things it does to people. All the more reason to stop it, William said firmly. Will you help us or not? I stared at them for a long moment, letting them see the internal struggle playing out across my face. Finally, I nodded slowly. God forgive me, I whispered. I'll take you as far as the outer perimeter. But when I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back. Don't try to be heroes. Just get out. The investigators exchanged triumphant looks, and I felt another piece of my soul crumble into dust. They thought they'd convinced me to help them. They had no idea I'd just sealed their death warrants. As I led them deeper into the forest, following trails I now knew would eventually lead to the Bone Throne clearing, I found myself wondering if this was how it had started for the converted rangers. A small compromise, a necessary evil, a choice between bad and worse that gradually eroded everything they'd once believed about themselves. Behind us, something tall and skeletal kept pace through the trees, staying just out of sight but close enough to ensure we stayed on the proper path. The hunt had begun, and I was no longer sure who the prey was supposed to be. The investigators' equipment started malfunctioning about 20 minutes into our hike. David's thermal camera began showing impossible readings, cold spots that moved independently through the trees, heat signatures that appeared and vanished without explanation. Thomas's electromagnetic field detector went haywire, screaming warnings about energy levels that shouldn't exist in nature. William's audio equipment picked up sounds that made him go pale and shut off the recording device with shaking hands. This is incredible, David whispered, his scientific excitement overriding his growing unease. The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's generating this kind of electromagnetic interference has to be massive, or very close, Thomas added, scanning the forest around us with growing nervousness. The trees seemed to press closer with each step we took, and the normal sounds of wildlife had gone completely silent. I led them along a winding path that I knew would eventually terminate at the Bone Throne clearing, but slowly giving the Wendigo time to prepare its stage. The creature wanted this encounter to be memorable. A perfect blend of terror and documentation that would serve its purposes long after the investigators were dead. "How much farther?" William asked, and I could hear the strain in his voice. Whatever his recording equipment had picked up back there had clearly shaken him. "Not far," I replied, which was true enough. We were maybe half a mile from the clearing now, close enough that I could smell that familiar stench of decay and wrongness that marked the Wendigos' domain. But we should stop here. This is as close as I'm willing to go. The investigators looked around at the seemingly ordinary forest, tall pines, scattered oaks, normal woodland undergrowth. But their instruments were telling a different story. Every piece of equipment they carried was registering anomalies that defied conventional explanation. "There's something here," David said, adjusting his thermal camera. "Multiple heat signatures, but they're not following normal patterns. They're too cold, too static. It's like they're dead but still moving." He had no idea how accurate his assessment was. The converted rangers were positioned throughout the forest around us, waiting for the Wendigo's signal to close in. They'd been human once, but whatever process the creature used to break their minds had left them changed in ways that went beyond psychology. Their body temperature had dropped, their metabolism slowed, their life signs reduced to barely detectable levels. "We need to set up our equipment," Thomas said, pulling out electromagnetic sensors and motion detectors. "If we can get a clear reading on these anomalies, we might be able to determine what we're dealing with." "No," I said, trying to inject real urgency into my voice. "We can't stay here. It knows we're here now, knows we're watching. The longer we remain in one place, the more dangerous this becomes." But they weren't listening anymore. The lure of scientific discovery had overridden their survival instincts, just as the Wendigo had predicted. They were already unpacking their gear, setting up monitoring stations with the methodical precision of people who thought they were in control of the situation. That's when I heard it. The sound that had haunted my nightmares for days now. The rasp of inhuman breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere very close. The investigators heard it too, and their excited chatter died away as they realized they were no longer alone in the forest. "Did you get that?" William whispered, checking his recording levels. "Please tell me you got that." The breathing sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the soft crack of breaking branches, as something large moved through the underbrush. David raised his thermal camera, scanning the trees for the source of the disturbance. "There," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. 30 degrees northwest, maybe 50 feet out. It's, Jesus Christ, look at the size of that heat signature." I didn't need to look. I could feel the Wendigo's presence like a weight pressing down on my shoulders, could sense its alien intelligence studying us with the calculating gaze of a predator, deciding which prey to take first. This was it, the moment of truth, when the investigators would finally understand what they'd come looking for. The creature emerged from the trees with theatrical slowness, allowing them time to document its approach with their cameras and sensors. In the afternoon light, it looked even more impossible than before. A skeletal giant that moved with fluid grace despite its unnatural proportions. The investigators stood transfixed, their scientific minds struggling to process something that violated every law of biology they understood. "My God," Thomas whispered, his electromagnetic detector screaming as it registered energy levels that shouldn't exist in normal space-time. "What is that thing?" The Wendigo's skull turned toward him with obvious interest, empty sockets somehow managing to convey both intelligence and amusement. When it spoke, its voice was the harmony I'd grown to dread. Dozens of stolen voices layered into a chorus of the damned. "I am what comes after," it said, and the investigators' recording equipment went wild, capturing audio that would later drive listeners to madness or suicide. "I am the hunger that outlived flesh, the need that transcended death. You came seeking proof of the impossible, and here I am." David was still filming, his hands shaking so badly the thermal camera could barely maintain focus. "This is incredible," he breathed. "We're actually documenting a genuine supernatural entity. This will change everything." The creature's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. "Oh yes," it agreed. "This will certainly change everything. Beginning with your understanding of what it means to be human." That's when the converted rangers began to emerge from the forest around us, moving with that same synchronized precision I'd seen before. The investigators spun in circles, trying to keep track of multiple threats, their equipment registering impossibilities in every direction. "Gideon," William called out, his voice cracking with panic. "What's happening? What are those things?" I looked at him with genuine pity, remembering what it had been like to maintain hope in the face of this horror. "They used to be people," I said quietly. "People who came looking for the truth. Just like you. People who thought their equipment and their knowledge could protect them from something like this." The Wendigo approached the investigators slowly, savoring their growing terror like a fine wine. "Gentlemen," it said conversationally, "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your work documenting supernatural phenomena has been quite entertaining. So methodical, so rational, so utterly inadequate for the reality you're about to experience." "You can't be real," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. The thermal camera in his hands was showing readings that defied everything he thought he knew about the physical world. "Reality is a flexible concept," the creature replied. "What you consider impossible, I consider inevitable. What you call supernatural, I call the natural order finally revealing itself. You've spent years hunting for proof that monsters exist. Congratulations, you found one." The converted rangers were closing in now, forming a perfect circle around our group. Their movements were eerily coordinated, like separate parts of a single organism working in harmony. The investigators huddled together, their scientific bravado evaporating in the face of genuine supernatural threat. "What do you want?" Thomas asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already suspected the answer. "From you." "Entertainment," the Wendigo said simply. "Fear, despair. The exquisite moment when hope dies and rational minds collapse under the weight of impossible truth. Your deaths will be educational experiences, carefully crafted to extract maximum psychological impact." "And from me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer to that question as well. The creature's empty sockets turned toward me with obvious approval. "From you I want exactly what you've already given me. You've brought them here, played your role perfectly, demonstrated the kind of pragmatic morality that makes for such effective collaboration. You're learning, Gideon. Adapting. Becoming what I need you to be." William was frantically checking his equipment, looking for some technological solution to a fundamentally supernatural problem. "The electromagnetic readings are impossible," he muttered. "Whatever this entity is, it's generating enough energy to power a small city. How is that even possible?" "Possibilities are for the living," the Wendigo replied. "I am sustained by forces that your science cannot measure, fed by emotions that your instruments cannot detect. Fear, despair, the slow dissolution of sanity. These are my food and drink." David lowered his thermal camera with shaking hands. "You're going to kill us," he said. And it wasn't really a question. "Eventually," the creature agreed. "But not quickly, not efficiently. Where would be the artistry in that? No, gentlemen, you're going to experience something far more interesting than mere death. You're going to learn what it means to have your humanity slowly stripped away, layer by layer, until nothing remains but willing servants of a hunger older than civilization." The investigators looked around desperately, searching for some escape route from the circle of converted rangers. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Wendigo had been preparing this encounter for months, and every contingency had been planned for. That's when I made my decision. Not a heroic decision. I was far past the point where heroism was possible. Not a moral decision. I'd already compromised my conscience beyond repair. But a practical decision, based on cold calculation of what might be possible in a situation where nothing good was going to happen. I couldn't save the investigators. That had never been an option, despite what I'd told myself during the hike. The Wendigo had been planning their deaths for too long, had invested too much effort in orchestrating their arrival. They were already dead, they just didn't know it yet. But maybe I could save Jennifer. Maybe I could extract some small victory from this nightmare. Preserve one innocent life in exchange for my willing participation in this atrocity. "I need to go back for Jennifer," I said, interrupting the creature's monologue about the various torments it had planned for its new victims. The Wendigo's skull tilted in that curious gesture. "Jennifer is perfectly safe in my clearing, Gideon. She's not going anywhere." "That's not what I mean," I said, meeting those empty sockets with as much steady resolve as I could manage. "I need to escort her out of the woods personally. Make sure she reaches safety, gets proper medical attention, has her story documented by the authorities." The creature studied me for a long moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in its alien mind. It was trying to determine whether my request served its purposes or worked against them. Interesting, it finally said. You want to ensure she survives to tell her tale. But why should I trust you to return? What guarantee do I have that you won't simply disappear, take your rescued victim and fade into anonymity somewhere far from my reach? Because you'll still have them, I said, gesturing toward the investigators. And because you know I'll come back. Jennifer's survival depends on my cooperation. And my cooperation depends on her continued safety. It's a perfect closed loop. I'm invested in maintaining our relationship because the alternative is watching an innocent woman suffer. David was staring at me with growing horror as he realized what I was proposing. You're just going to leave us here? He asked. Trade our lives for some woman we've never met? I looked at him with genuine sadness. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it, but you were dead the moment you decided to come looking for monsters in the woods. Nothing I do or don't do will change that now. The Wendigo applauded slowly, the sound echoing through the forest like breaking bones. Excellent reasoning, it said with obvious approval. You're beginning to understand the true nature of moral choice in extreme circumstances. There are no good options, Gideon, only degrees of necessary evil. Is that a yes? I asked. The creature considered for another moment, then nodded. Yes. Take Jennifer back to the world. Ensure her story is properly documented and widely disseminated. But remember, her continued safety depends on your continued usefulness to my purposes. I turned to walk away, but David's voice stopped me. How do you live with yourself? He asked. How do you sleep at night, knowing what you've become? The question hit me like a physical blow, because I didn't have a good answer. How would I live with myself? How would I function in normal society, knowing what I'd done and what I'd agreed to continue doing? How did anyone survive the kind of moral compromise that left their soul in ruins? I don't know, I said honestly, but I'll figure it out because the alternative is worse. The last thing I heard as I walked away was the sound of the investigators screaming as the converted rangers closed in on them. Their cries followed me through the forest, growing fainter but never quite disappearing, becoming part of the soundtrack that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. I found Jennifer where I'd left her, still sitting in the bone-thrown clearing but now surrounded by artifacts from the Wendigo's decades of hunting. Skulls arranged in neat rows, personal effects sorted by type and date, photographs of victims pinned to trees like some macabre installation. She looked up when I approached, and I could see that her time alone had changed her. The naive graduate student was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly what kind of world she lived in. They're dead, aren't they? She asked. The men you led here. Not yet, I replied, but they will be. The creature wanted me to guide them into its trap, and I did. I chose your life over theirs. She stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through a range of emotions. Horror, disgust, understanding, and finally something that might have been pity. And now you're going to take me back to civilization, she said. Make sure I tell the right people the right story. Turn me into the creature's witness, its prophet of fear. Yes. And if I refuse? If I decide to keep silent, to pretend none of this ever happened? I thought about the Wendigo's threats, about its network of converted servants, and its infinite patience for long-term planning. Then it will find you, I said, and it will turn you into something worse than a witness. It will make you one of them. Jennifer stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her clothes with hands that shook only slightly. So I don't really have a choice either. None of us do, I said. That's the point. It's taken away our ability to choose and replaced it with the illusion of choice. We can cooperate willingly, or be forced to cooperate unwillingly, but cooperation is inevitable either way. We walked out of the woods together in silence, two survivors carrying a story that would spread like cancer through the connected world. Behind us, the Wendigo settled back onto its throne of bones to enjoy its new playthings, secure in the knowledge that its influence was expanding beyond the boundaries of its forest domain. The local authorities were waiting for us at the Trailhead Park Rangers, sheriff's deputies, even a couple of state police investigators who'd been called in when the search teams reported the impossible things they'd found in the woods. They wanted statements, medical examinations, detailed descriptions of our ordeal. Jennifer told them exactly what the Wendigo wanted them to hear. A story of supernatural horror balanced carefully between credibility and impossibility. She described the creature in clinical, scientific terms, documenting its abilities and behavior patterns with the precision of a trained researcher. She mentioned the missing investigators, the converted rangers, the systematic nature of the disappearances. I corroborated her account, adding my own details about the creature's intelligence and planning abilities. Together we painted a picture of something so far outside normal experience that it would fascinate rather than repel, draw investigators rather than deter them. Within hours, word of our story had leaked to local media. Within days, it had spread to national news outlets and social media platforms. Within weeks, the woods around Redwood Falls had become a pilgrimage site for every paranormal investigator, thrill-seeker, and would-be monster hunter in the country. The Wendigos' plan worked perfectly. Jennifer returned to her academic life, but she was changed. She published papers on survival psychology and folklore studies, became an expert on supernatural trauma and the cultural impact of monster legends. Her work was widely read and cited, lending scientific credibility to claims that might otherwise have been dismissed as fantasy. I found myself thrust into an unwanted spotlight as the man who survived the Wendigo. My story was featured in documentaries and podcast series, analyzed by believers and skeptics alike. People came from around the world to interview me, to hear firsthand about my encounter with the impossible, and one by one they began disappearing into the woods. Not all of them, of course. The Wendigo was too smart to eliminate every visitor that would have aroused too much suspicion, brought too much official attention, but enough vanished to maintain the legend, to keep the story alive and growing. Each disappearance generated new interest, new investigations, new potential victims drawn to the creature's web. I tried to discourage them. I warned everyone who would listen about the genuine danger, described the horrors I'd witnessed in clinical detail, but my warnings had the opposite effect. They only made the story more compelling, more irresistible to people who thought they were braver or smarter than those who'd vanished before them. The Wendigo had been right about human nature. Tell people they can't have something, and they'll want it more than anything else in the world. 6 months after my escape from the woods, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a collection of photographs, images taken by the converted rangers of their latest victims. Men and women who'd come looking for the truth about Redwood Falls, who'd sought me out for guidance and warnings before venturing into the forest. At the bottom of the package was a handwritten note in spidery script. "Thank you for your continued service. Your effectiveness as a herald exceeds even my expectations. I look forward to our next collaboration." That night I stood in my kitchen holding a loaded shotgun, the barrel pressed against the roof of my mouth, trying to find the courage to end my participation in this nightmare. But even as I felt my finger tighten on the trigger, I thought about Jennifer. The creature had made it clear that my continued cooperation was the price of her safety. If I died, she would become its next target, not for conversion, but for something worse. I lowered the gun and returned it to its cabinet. There would be no escape through death, no heroic sacrifice that would redeem the choices I'd made. I was bound to the Wendigo now, linked to its hunger by chains forged from my own moral compromises. The next morning, I received a phone call from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to discuss a new project about the Redwood Falls incidents. He'd already assembled a team of experts and investigators, had funding from a major streaming platform, planned to spend 2 weeks in the forest documenting whatever had been taking people. I agreed to serve as their local guide. Because I am the Wendigo's herald now, whether I want to be or not. I am the voice that spreads its legend, the survivor whose testimony draws new prey to its web. I am the man who chose to save one innocent life by sacrificing hundreds of others, and I will carry that choice with me until something finally claims me in those dark woods. But I want you to know, all of you who are reading this, all of you who might be tempted to come looking for proof that monsters are real, I want you to know that I tried to warn you. I tried to tell you the truth about what waits in the forest around Redwood Falls. The creature is real. It is ancient and intelligent and infinitely patient. It has had decades to perfect its methods, to prepare its traps, to convert humans into willing servants of its hunger. It knows you're reading this. It knows you're curious about the story I've told, wondering if any of it could possibly be true. And it's counting on that curiosity to bring you to its woods. So when you pack your cameras and your courage, and your absolute certainty that you're too smart to fall for whatever trick claimed the others, remember this. I warned you. Jennifer warned you. Even the Wendigo itself has warned you, through the testimony of its previous victims. But you won't listen. You never listen. Because you're already dead. You just don't know it yet. The only question now is whether you'll be another anonymous victim, or whether you'll survive long enough to become the next herald, the next voice calling others into the darkness. I hope for your sake and mine that you choose to stay away. But I know you won't. Welcome to Redwood Falls.